Clemson basketball has made the NCAA tournament 2 years in a row. 1 year, it resulted in an excellent, memorable Elite Eight run. The other year, a abysmal but still memorable loss to 12-seed McNeese, coached by Will Wade, who's now at NC State. And so you have those 2 years with very, very different endings. And it's only right that with all the debate of how good is Brad Brownell, Brad Brownell's got an extension now. Let me try to put it in perspective. I try not to be too much of a Brad Brownell lover, or to try not to be too harsh. And I took a look at the entire conference and just took an objective look at what they've accomplished. It all stops as a head coach, and really where Brad Brownell stacks up. And so I'm going to talk about all the different coaches, and then you'll see where Brownell slots in. I'll talk about him a little bit longer than the others, but I'm going to break them all down for the most part. But before I get to that, first of all, don't forget to like and to subscribe to this channel. It really helps it grow, and I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you who have done that already. We're well over 1,000 now, so thank you. But first, I want to talk about revenue sharing just really briefly. There's been a little bit of trickle coming out, nothing kind of clear, but I've seen that Clemson may give about 11%, maybe a little more, we'll see, to basketball. And in conversation with somebody, I was worried that, Coach Sweeney had said no one's going to have more than us for football. And I've been, I definitely want to give football the vast majority of it. And I don't want to really use any of it on anything besides football or basketball. Not that I don't respect the other sports, but once you start spreading it out, you can't really win championships in football and basketball anymore. And so I did some math, and I said, what if we just paid gave the same average, not the same for every individual player. Obviously, the starting quarterback is going to make more than the backup kicker. But if every football player and every basketball player on average made the same, what would that average be? And how much would you allocate to each program? And so I did the math, and it's pretty simple math, which you see here. But if you took that $20.5 million and spread it across 120 scholarships, or 120 roster spots, I should say, 15 basketball, which is the max, and 105 football, which is also the new max there, you come out to paying them slightly over $170,000 on average. Pretty darn good. And for basketball, that comes out to about $2.5 million, and for football, it's right around $18 million. So as a percentage, you see basketball will get 12.5, football will get 87.5. So I think that's some good perspective there. This is obviously going to have some impact, I don't know if on the rankings, but the success of the coaches in the coming years moving forward, as this eats up a lot of, overshadows, I should say, a lot of the NIL budget, and maybe makes it a little bit easier to recruit for the coaches who aren't quite as good at recruiting. So this all could change in the future, and I think that's good perspective here before we dive into the coaching rankings. But now let's do that. So I'm not going to spend too much time here at the bottom, but some thoughts on some of these new coaches or coaches that generally take up the bottom half, let's say, of the conference. Jai Lucas is the new hire at Miami. He comes over from Duke, where he was an assistant. I don't think it was necessarily a bad hire. That's not why he's on the bottom. Just doesn't have head coaching experience, so I'm not going to jump him over some others. Luke Lux is a former Florida State player. That's a theme you'll hear as I go through this. But he played there. Then he coached as an assistant in the NBA, where he was an assistant for the Golden State Warriors. He won an NBA championship there. He was assistant for the Sacramento Kings. He comes back to Tallahassee. I actually kind of like this hire. I think it could work out. There's a lot of good kind of like alumni love for the school kind of vibes and the NBA ties. I also don't think Florida State is an easy place to win at for basketball. So we'll see how he does there. For now, we'll start those two at the bottom. Damon Stoudemire does have experience as a head coach. He's been at Georgia Tech for a while now, 2 years there. Before that, 5 years at Pacific. He's never coached an NCAA tournament team. His best ranked team per KenPom was this year's Georgia Tech team at 103. I thought it was a great hire. I think they've got some good talent there. But at a certain point, you got to start winning games. They were 17-17 this year, and they just lost at home in the NIT to Jacksonville State in a blowout. Look, we've been there. Clemson's done that to Oakland. Clemson's done that to Morehead State. So that's not a death sentence per se, but it's Stoudemire's he's got to start turning those into wins. Great, you can bring in talent. Great that you're a big name. You got to start winning games. So I think he's kind of a hot seat guy going into next year. Red Autry is an alum. He was assistant at Syracuse. And now he's the head coach. There's been there 2 years, has not brought them to the tournament yet. This year's team actually took a step back. Last year they were 20-12, and this year they were only 14-19. So he was an assistant under Jim Boeheim. I know that's big shoes to fill, but and I don't know that he's even on the hot seat quite yet. But they need to show some progress. Looking forward to next season. Earl Grant at Boston College, he was actually an assistant under Brownell in the early years of his tenure. Then he went to College of Charleston, where he had some success, but not anything out of this world crazy. It wasn't like this home run superstar coach. He was there for 7 years and made the tournament once as a 13 seed in 2018, and they lost. Kind of an interesting hire to bring him back to the ACC. He's been probably less than okay at Boston College. They've had a losing ACC record every year. Last year, 2024, not the most recent season, but in 2024, they were 71 in KenPom, which isn't bad, but it's not good. I mean, it is bad for an ACC school. So could argue him being lower, but he's got a lot of experience. The facilities there aren't great. I don't know what their NIL budget looks like. Let's see how he does with revenue sharing and how that helps him kind of even the playing field there, but certainly hasn't been very successful at BC. Micah Shrewsbury was very successful at Penn State. He hasn't been at Notre Dame long, so give him a little grace, a little time. That's sort of why he falls in there. Mark Madsen at Cal, former Los Angeles Lakers basketball player from when I was growing up. He was at Utah Valley for 4 years, never made the tournament, although he had one team that was really good in the WAC, went 28-9. But did not win the WAC conference tournament and didn't get an at-large bid. He's been at Cal 2 years. They've had a losing record both years, just 121, 111 in KenPom. So they just haven't been that good. We'll see if they could get something going in the ACC, but hasn't been so great so far. And then Cal Smith above him. He's actually got a long coaching career. He was at Columbia for some time. He was at San Francisco, and then he was at Washington State. Never made the tournament until 2024 at Washington State. They were 7 seed. They won a tournament game. He got the job at Stanford. He was pretty solid for what he did at Washington State. Had some good teams, or some solid teams at least. You would think Stanford's an easier place to coach than Washington State. This was only his first year, so I'm a little slow to judge there, but he still falls in this kind of lower tier in the ACC. Then we get into some guys that most people have heard of, good reputations. Jeff Capel at Pitt. He was the assistant at Duke. So again, I mentioned that's kind of going to be a theme. You have Jai Lucas at Miami. You have Jeff Capel at Pitt. I didn't quite realize this until I looked into it. He actually was a head coach for a while. He was at VCU, where he made the NCAA tournament once in 4 years there. He was at Oklahoma for 5 years, where he made an Elite Eight run and also a run to the, I don't know if you call it a run, but made it to the round of 32 while he was there. That was back when they were in the Big 12. And then he was an assistant for a while at Duke. And it was kind of like maybe he was going to be the heir apparent for Coach K, but he's also not super young, so he couldn't just wait forever. So he went to Pitt. Seemed like a pretty good move. And he's only made the tournament once there. They were an 11 seed in 2023. They won a playing game and won a first round game. Beyond that, they haven't been great. They've got 2 years of being above 500 in the ACC. This year they had a great non-con, and then they were really bad, 8-12 in a really bad ACC. I think next year, I don't know if he finds himself on the hot seat, but maybe he should. This ACC isn't very good, and your Pitt seems like you're one of the better programs. I think they should be a team that makes the tournament a lot more than once every 7-8 years, right? So I think they probably need to make the tournament next year, or at least that should be the expectation, in my opinion. Mike Young was at Wofford for 17 years, so really, really long stay there, and he had some more than solid. He had some really good teams, particularly for a program like that. They made the tournament 5 times. In his last year there, they were 7 seed who won a game at Wofford, which is a big deal there. This is a guy who a lot of Clemson fans really wanted after that. Was in Spartanburg for so long, knew the area, had consistent success at Wofford, and then had some pretty big success there at the end. But he goes to Virginia Tech. Clemson sticks with Brad Brownell. And in the beginning, things were going really, really well in Virginia Tech and Blacksburg. His third year there, They were an 11 seed, but they won the ACC championship, and they were 19th in KenPom, so probably should have been a better seed than that. But they, that's something Clemson has never done. So at that point, it seemed like incredible home run hire. Clemson should have got them. But then these last 3 years, they won 19, 19, and then just 13 games. And this year they were outside the top 150, a really bad ACC team. I mean, there's no nice way to say it. Virginia Tech was terrible this year. And so that really lowers Mike Young on this list. This is why he's only 9. Prior to this year, I would have had him higher. I think everyone would have had him higher. And so I don't want to say Clemson dodged a bullet, but certainly the success you've had with Coach Brownell is equal to better than what Virginia Tech has experienced with Mike Young. And so that's just an interesting juxtaposition. And that's why I think Brad Brownell is a no-brainer to be above him. We'll see when we get to Brad Brownell. But right above him is Steve Forbes at Wake Forest. Forbes has been there for 5 years, and he's never made the tournament. He was before that at East Tennessee State and was there for 5 years. And he made the tournament once as a 13 seed, didn't win a game, didn't advance. But at Wake, he hasn't been bad. Starting after his first year, they were bad. They were 6-16. They were bad. But after that, they won 25, 19, 21, and 21 games. So they've been really solid, just not quite good enough to make the tournament. Last year's team was ranked 28th in KenPom, but they tend to fall off late in the year. They tend to fade, and it's kind of like their football team. They tend to just lose those games when they really need them to make the tournament. They were a fringe tournament team this year. They finished 3-5 down the stretch. They were 2-4 last year down the stretch before an NIT bid. They were 2-5 the year before that. So that's what makes me a little down on Forbes is, when the calendar gets, late February, March, his teams kind of fade. And at a certain point, the point of all this is to make runs in March, or at least make it to March, March Madness. And he hasn't done that at Wake. So I don't think it's easy to win at Wake, but it's certainly not the toughest. It is traditionally a basketball school that's had success. So I think it's a guy that probably should be on the hot seat. How many years are you going to not make the tournament before you make a change? I think he's probably a good coach, but you got to have results at some point. As you go up from there, let me advance this. So Ryan Odom, when I first saw the hire, was really blown away by it. He was at VCU this year. And then I looked into it some more. I think it is a good hire, but I might have had him higher in this ranking when I first heard about it. And now I think 7's about right. So he coached VCU to 11 seed. They lost to BYU this year, and then Virginia took him. It's really interesting because this was the guy who was at Maryland-Baltimore County when they were a 16 seed, and they beat Virginia. So he was there for a few years, had that big win. Virginia, of course, went on and won a national championship after that. Ryan Odom went to Utah State. He made the tournament once while he was at Utah State as a 10 seed. Then he comes over to VCU. He takes over for a VCU team that was a 12 seed the year before. In his first year there, they missed the tournament. Then this last year, they were an 11 seed, lost to BYU. So actually his only NCAA tournament win ever as a coach was over Virginia as a 16 seed, which is kind of weird. I think he's a good coach, but the resume is not one that really blows you away quite as much as I thought when I heard VCU. But VCU has cycled through some coaches, so he's only been there the 2 years. Above him is Andy Enfield. I think for SMU is punching above their weight class a little bit with some of the coaching hires they've made. Rhett Lashley in football, I think, is outstanding. Andy Enfield, they took him. He was not fired. They took him from USC. Maybe he was feeling some pressure at USC. I don't know, but impressive when you're taking guys from a program like Southern Cal. He reached the Sweet 16 when he was the coach of Florida Gulf Coast, and then he got hired to USC out in LA. He was there 11 years. In those 11 years, he made one Elite Eight run. He made a round of 32, and he made the tournament 3 other times. So, for Southern Cal, that's probably just okay, not unbelievable. But to bring that talent in from there to SMU, I think is pretty impressive. In his first year at SMU, they jumped up 24 spots in KenPom, and they were at least a fringe tournament kind of team for a lot of the year. So I think he's a solid coach. Now we get into some of the coaches that I think are quite good, and Pat Kelsey is certainly one. I'm a big fan of Pat Kelsey, although maybe not a Louisville fan by any means, but I like Pat Kelsey. On a personal note, I just loved what he said when he got asked about how emotionally difficult it is to play such a hard schedule. And his response was, look, I got healthy kids, a hot wife, and a job that's basically awesome. I'm not going to ask for too much sympathy about a hard schedule. It's a blessing to have this job. I thought that was pretty cool. And then obviously what he did this year is just insane turnaround. They only won 8 games last year. They were 185th in KenPom last year. They won 27 games and were an 8 seed. They lost to Creighton, but he's been very good. He was at College of Charleston. He took over after Earl Grant went to Boston College. And he made the tournament there twice. Once as 12, once as 13. And then he went to then he gets this job, and he's obviously, this turnaround has been really, really impressive. But he's also 0-5 in the tournament. Before Charleston, he was at Winthrop, and he was there for quite a while. Let's see, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. And they made the tournament twice. They never advanced. So he is 0-5 in NCAA tournament games. So if you look at just Louisville and an amazing turnaround, you might put him 1. But when you look into the overall resume, you realize he's never won a tournament game. They were favored. I thought they were the better team. They go to Creighton, they lose that game. I'm not going to put him that high for a guy who's never won a tournament game. So love Pat Kelsey. I think they're going to do big things at Louisville. That's a program that can win at a really high level. Obviously, they can win national championships there. And maybe he will. But for now, I'm going to put him 5. Hubert Davis is at the blue blood of all blue bloods in North Carolina. His first year, they go to the national championship game. Of course, they were also an 8 seed. Then last season, they made the Sweet 16 as a 1 seed. I think being a 1 seed is pretty great. I think making the Sweet 16 is pretty great. Maybe not for UNC standards, but for normal standards, that's pretty darn good. And then this year, not as good. They were just abject bad the entire first half of the season. They really turned it around, snuck in as the absolute last team in the NCAA tournament, blew out their opponent in the playing game, San Diego State, and then lost in the first round to Ole Miss. So I actually really thought they were favored even over 6 seed Ole Miss. I thought they'd win that. They did not. This is one of the tougher grades because he's at North Carolina. How easy is it to recruit to North Carolina? Pretty easy, right? You got all the resources, you got all the history, you've got a crowd that's going to pack out a huge arena pretty much every game. It's not hard to be at the top of the ACC, and they were 5th. Like, you've got a better program than the 5th best program. So to some extent, shooting under expectations and under resources, but at the same time, in 3 years, he played for a national championship, made the tournament, and made the Sweet 16, 3 out of 4 years. I'd sign up for that any day. So really hard to grade because it's a place that's easier to win at, but also Sweet 16 and a national championship runner-up is awfully good in 4 years, not to mention they still made the tournament this year, in which we considered a bad year. All right, so above him, number 3, I have Brad Brownell. A lot to talk about here. So your evaluation of Brad Brownell is going to be largely based on, do you take his first 7 years and weight them every bit as much as the last 8, right? If you count those as equal, then you're going to say Brad Brownell is too low because there's tons of scar tissue from those first 7 years. There's tons of failure in those first 7 years. His first year, they made the tournament. They won a play-in game over UAB, lost to West Virginia, and then they didn't make the tournament again, that 7-year stretch. They were bad. They had some teams that just didn't have offensive talent. The recruiting was poor. The game has changed. Obviously, with the transfer portal, with NIL, with revenue sharing coming, and with facilities. So in 2016, Brownell, kind of behind the scenes from a fan perspective, was doing a lot of fundraising and getting alignment with the AD at Clemson. And they finally invested, and they played the 2016 season up in Greenville, in Bon Secours at the time. And so they were kind of at a disadvantage playing in Greenville, driving up there, not having the students on campus, just walk to the games. They still won 17 games. Then they get all the nice new facility, the practice court, all of that. They come back, they only win 17 games again. Didn't feel great, no progress. They also finished finished poorly that year, 4-8 down the stretch. Then they had what for me is extremely memorable season-ending NIT loss in Clemson to Oakland of the Horizon League. Felt pretty bad. You've been waiting on this facility. You come back, and that's sort of like a bad season, first year in the new Yankee Stadium kind of feel. Pretty disappointing. This was also when Will Wade had just left VCU, and Clemson didn't get him. LSU got him. So Clemson fans were pretty upset about that. it seemed like Will Wade was prone to have a lot more success. And Will Wade, will talk about him, but obviously he got involved in paying players, the FBI scandal back when that was illegal, and LSU's really paid the price for that. But that was also the inflection point for Clemson, kind of as unlikely as it was. Now you had those facilities. It wasn't immediate, but the talent started coming in, and the next I guess would be the next 7 years. So the 7 most recent years have been pretty good. Clemson made the Sweet 16. Then they had a pretty good team in 2019, 36 in Ken Palm, didn't make it. 2020, they were bad, but the tournament got canceled. 2021, they were 7 seed, lost to Rutgers. They had 2 kind of disappointing years after that. And then they were 19th in Ken Palm, and they made a run to the Elite Eight. And this year they were a 5 seed, obviously. They had a pretty embarrassing loss to McNeese. Now, I'm not going to call that unbelievable, that stretch, but it's good. And it's probably, if not the best, then the second best long stretch of Clemson basketball in school history. You had about 89 to 98 between Cliff Ellis and Rick Barnes. That was a good stretch. Maybe it was better, but that's across 2 coaches. And that's really the only stretch that's even a little bit of a debate. And I know that there is a lot of, like I said, scar tissue with Clemson fans from the entire 15 years. Even if you don't go back to the Oakland loss, even since then, there was another NIT loss to Morehead State at home. Pretty embarrassing. Constant disappointments in the ACC tournament. And now you've got this McNeese loss. It was one of the worst halves, the worst half by a 5 seed since 1999, scored 13 points. All of that is totally fair and legitimate to be upset about. And I think that does lower Brownell on this ranking from where he otherwise would be. But if we're objective, you're also seeing that Brownell has adapted better than nearly any coach in terms of NIL and transfer portal. He was way ahead of Coach Dabo Swinney on this. And that's why you saw football kind of start to fall when basketball was having the great Elite Eight run, right? It's because he brought in a lot of talent. He's been consistent with that. He does it while maintaining a strong culture, which was always the fear of the football program. They're doing it in basketball. And they're going to have to do it again because they lost a ton of talent. And so these next 2 years will really show if they're building on this, or if this was a little 2-year stretch, you lose all the talent and now you're bad again. We'll find out. But this stretch includes a Sweet 16, an Elite Eight, and 2 other appearances. It's 4 appearances in the last 8 years, counting this season. And a couple of years ago, we were saying, if you could make the tournament half the time and at least occasionally win a game, we'll be happy. That's exactly what's happening. They've made the tournament half the time, and half of those times they've won multiple games. So overall, I think, especially when compared to a down ACC, he's one of the best in the conference. And I'd even say that his in-game coaching has improved. You saw his recruiting's definitely improved, especially with the portal. But his in-game coaching, I remember years ago, kind of early in his tenure, these teams could not inbound the ball. And now I remember, I think it was the Arizona game in the tournament last year, they were dicing them up and getting easy layups off of inbounding plays. So look, it's not perfect with Brownell. I'm not saying he's an elite top 10 coach in the nation by any means, but he is top 3 in the ACC, and I think it's pretty clear. We went through all of them, and I honestly don't think it's much of a debate between him and the ones below him. The biggest debate really is between Brownell and the guy I have right above him, Will Wade. And Will Wade, obviously, there's some recency bias there. Will Wade obviously just beat Clemson at McNeese, right? So there's something there. And I would also say, if I'm being honest, Will Wade pretty thoroughly outcoached him, bouncing between zone and man and denying the post, and Clemson couldn't figure it out. I know that there were some injuries for Clemson. Obviously, Dylan Hunter being out really hurt Clemson, but that's on the coach to adjust. And Ian Shefflin did not look healthy at all. But again, that's a little bit on the coach to adjust. But when you look at what Will Wade has done across every stop, the massive immediate improvement is incredible. Maybe you dock him some credit for what he did at LSU because they were cheating. They were paying players before you were allowed. But whether you do that or not, over the last 9 seasons, he's had 2 at VCU, 5 at LSU, and 2 at McNeese before now going to NC State. And his teams have made the tournament 7 times. They would have made it in 2020 as well. They've won 5 games over those 9 years. Certainly, I mean, winning a game basically every other year, a little bit better, is pretty good. And then his first year at Chattanooga, they got 5 more wins than the prior year. His first year at LSU, they got 8 more wins than the prior year. In McNeese, they added 19 wins in the first year, which is insane. NC State was only 12-19. Could they flip that and get 7 more wins, go 19-12? I think so. I think they could even hit 20 wins. The guy's a turnaround artist. The stuff he was doing that was cheating, yes, it is a legitimate ethical concern, but all that stuff's legal now. So some time has passed. He's kind of paid his dues going to McNeese. The guy loves Clemson football. He does not have his team's practice when Clemson football is playing a game. You see him crying after they lost to Purdue. Seems like he loves his players. I'm prone to not hate the guy, Clemson grad. I think he's immediately one of the top 3 coaches in the ACC. Not saying I want him over Coach Brownell. I just think they're both very good coaches, and they belong 2-3. And then number 1 is honestly no debate. It's Jon Scheyer. This is the guy. He was on the same another Duke assistant. He was on the same staff as Jeff Capel, but he's younger. Capel sort of needed to leave and go and take the job before Coach K retired. Scheyer was young enough he could wait for Coach K to retire. He's under 40, and he's had immediate success, obviously, at Duke. He recruits really, really well, brings in the top talent. And I know maybe that's not the hardest thing to do at Duke, but he's vastly out recruiting, let's say, like Kansas and UNC. And I don't think it's that much easier at Duke than those schools, Kentucky even. They were incredible in the ACC. 1 ACC loss, of course, it was to Clemson, but they have a top 5 offense, top 5 defense. He's been great. His first year there, they won 27 games. His second year there, they won 27 games. That both of those tie what Clemson did this year, which was a school record. And then this year, I'm recording this before the year's over, but they're already in the Sweet 16, and I fully expect that to keep going. But regardless of whether they lose in the in their next game where they go on to win a national championship, he's earned the spot in just 3 years at Duke. He's earned the spot to be number 1. I think those top 3 are sort of maybe even the top 5 or maybe a cut above. And then after 7, you start wondering how good are they really? So sure, the ACC coaches perhaps are not anything to brag about, and maybe that's why the ACC is a little bit down. But I hope this gives Clemson fans some perspective. How good is Brownell? Should we be thankful and not complaining? Should we be upset with a failure? The truth usually lies somewhere in between, and I hope that's what this showed you. Hey, don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to subscribe. We've got some football content coming. I'm breaking down some the positions and the newcomers at each position. So check that out. Thanks for watching. As always, go Tigers.